Yeah, we'll do it live. We'll do it live.
Do it live.
Doing it live. Podcast Super Friends. We're back again. Hi, and welcome back. It's like we say welcome back, but it's like the only person who went away was me. But I'm back.
Welcome back to the North American continent, Matt.
Well, I'm glad you didn't forget how to speak English.
Yeah, I also didn't practice a lot of Spanish other than ordering my food. But I
margarita,
taco, por favor.
So today for the podcast Super Friends, I thought we would get into 20 questions, and I looked over the podcast news from the last month and go through emails and discussions, and it's basically just a lot of questions that people ask every day about starting a podcast. So what we're going to do today, it's not quite the Spanish Inquisition, but we're going to go around the table here with a number of questions. They're going to be short snappers. We'll see how quickly we can get through 20 of them. And we'll see which question we spend the most time on and go from there. So, but before we start with the questions, we'll go around the table and everybody will introduce themselves, starting with Catherine.
Hey, everybody. My name is Catherine O'Brien. I produce podcasts in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My company is called Branch Out Programs, and I'm so happy to be here and happy to see you, Matt. I'm ready for these 20 questions.
Hi, I'm Johnny Podcast, coming from Fort Worth, Texas. I'm also a podcast producer and an avid trying to grow my Twitter account, so follow me there.
Boston, hello.
Hello, Boston. This is David Yaz in Boston. We produce podcasts here at the Boston Podcast Network, pod617.com. In pod, we trust.
Detroit, hello.
Hello, Detroit. John Gay, Jag in Detroit podcast, originally from Boston, but that's not relevant to this conversation. I create podcasts for businesses and nonprofits. I also co-host podcasts for those who may not necessarily have the gift of gab online at jagindetroit.com.
So 20 questions. Here we go. And we're going to start with Jag, your favorite microphone that you recommend to a client that has never recorded a podcast before.
We'll probably have a lot of agreement in this group, but it is the Samson Q2U, Samson. The model is Q2U. Johnny is holding one up right now for those of you watching on video. Thank you, Vanna. It is versatile because it can be plugged into an XLR cable for a recorder or straight USB in your computer if you prefer. And it is a dynamic microphone, unlike the Blue Yeti, which is a condenser microphone. The dynamic microphone will pick up more of your voice and less of all the background sounds around you. The condenser microphone will pick up every barking dog and screaming neighbor in your neighborhood. So Samson Q2U for the win.
David.
Well, I hate to be repetitive, but I learned my microphones from Jag. It is also the Samson Q2U. My backup is usually anything by Audio-Technica in the same price range. But the information that I will add is you can get the Q2U for, I'm looking at it right now, $50 on Amazon. And what a tremendous bargain, because it's all you need. And I think you probably spend more on a Yeti or a Blue or one of those other lame mics. So I just have to agree with Jack.
Johnny, you've already held up that microphone. Is that the one you recommend?
I like to consider myself the black sheep of the group, so I'm going to offer something different. So the microphone that I'm currently using is the Shure MV7. That is what I would recommend. If you are looking to have kind of the look and style of a Joe Rogan type podcast, this microphone is the little brother of the SM7B. You can plug it directly into your computer via USB cable, or if you do want to go the handheld route, you can also try something like the ATR 2100X from Audio-Technica.
Catherine.
Well, Johnny just stole it right at the last second. The Audio-Technica 2100X is a great, right in the middle of there. I would say we've covered some good, better, best. We got some good, better, and best choices for people, especially if they're getting started. Of course, you can spend as much money as you want on a microphone, but we've given you a couple of options, 2 options that are great under $100 and one that is probably, $250 for the Shure?
Yeah.
So
it
yeah,
really it depends on your price range. You can go 100 or up to 400 or 500.
Yeah,
Jag,
but I like it. Good.
Jag, what mic are you using right now?
This is actually the Shure MV7, which I upgraded in my office. I have an SM7B downstairs. Those in my studio, those are about 400. The MV7 that I'm on right now is about 200. Same as Johnny right now.
Doesn't stick to his own advice. Offers
No,
one
the question
microphone,
was
buys a different one.
the
for
question
himself.
was for a new podcaster just
All right,
starting
fair.
out. I
For a
upgraded.
client, yeah.
Yes.
I'm not
Matt?
going to make an offering of any sort. I'm just going to say and pat myself on the back for rescuing 2 clients from the Blue Yeti this week. 2 of them showed up and they had Blue Yetis, and I said they'd actually recorded some episodes. And I said, these mics aren't even A, on, and B, you're not even talking to the right end of them.
The best setting for a Blue Yeti is off.
I feel like owning a Blue Yeti is like the prerequisite to wanting to start a podcast. I feel like you have to buy the Blue Yeti first, and then you go, oh, I should start a podcast.
It's a rite of passage, right?
Yeah.
Well, and Jag knows this. I've actually started, when I give materials to potential clients or just resources to people who are interested in podcasting, I actually now have a link to a very helpful video that will show people exactly how to use the Blue Yeti to get the best sound out of it, because it's not intuitive, and especially if it's your first mic, you might be a little bit in the dark. So I've just started sending that out for the people who have the Blue Yeti, who want to do podcasting until they get the mics that we're recommending.
That link is now on my podcast equipment recommendation page. So thank you, Catherine.
And even the term side address microphone still sails over my head.
Right.
No, and it's worth mentioning that for our listeners, which is an end address microphone, you speak into the end of it. A side address microphone, you want to speak into the side of it. So the mistake a lot of people make with the Blue Yeti, it is a side address microphone. If you are talking into the top of a Blue Yeti, you are not getting optimal sound from it as you would from talking into the side. The correct side, by the way.
Question for Catherine, the best recording platform, because there are some choices out there. These are the recording platforms that will allow you to record your show. There's a bunch of them out there. What do you recommend?
I am currently, this is very interesting, Matt, that you'd bring this up right now, because I'm currently using Zencastr, and I've been happy with Zencastr. I know that some people have had, whenever I say, oh yeah, I've been using Zencastr, I hear from people about one of their Zencastr disasters. In general, I would say I think that most of the platforms are comparable in their skills. I do think that Zencastr, because they're trying to raise money and they're trying to get investors, they've been starting to put on some bells and whistles that I think at first weren't very helpful. And of course, as soon as they started looking for investment money, I started having technical problems. They've made significant changes to their free hobbyist platform. So that's, in my opinion, essentially has gone away. So they're making a lot of changes, but I'm still using Zencastr for the time. I've had success with Squadcast, and I've also, frankly, after manipulating the advanced settings, you can do okay with Zoom, but I'm sticking with Zencastr for right now.
And Johnny.
David, the Zoom guy over here.
Yeah.
I am definitely a simp for Riverside. That's just what works easiest for me. I would agree with Catherine that they're all very comparable. What I really like about Riverside is that it's it's really comparable to Zoom. Most people are really familiar with using Zoom, and I would say I've probably done 50 Riverside sessions over the past 2 months, all with different guests, and have not had a single, maybe 1 or 2 people who have had issues getting onto Riverside. Riverside also has a mobile app. So if you don't have a laptop, but you still want to get on as a guest on the podcast, you can join on your phone. Although I don't recommend it. Obviously, we would all prefer for people to have microphones, treated rooms, things like that. Another thing that Riverside has just introduced is their transcription tool. So they're offering transcripts within their service, which I find it interesting, as with AI and all these like tools that are coming out to make transcripts easier and easier. I find that less and less people are caring about them. They're like, wait, do we actually want or need transcripts? So Riverside would be my recommendation.
David.
Well, I'm not going to tell you that Zoom has the best recording quality, but I will admit that I've used all the platforms that have been mentioned so far, and just have had a bad experience here or there. The reason why I prefer Zoom is, in my opinion, if you have a good mic on the other end, say you're doing it with a co-host and you're doing it by Zoom. I do my music podcast like this. We use Zoom. He has a good microphone. He's got a Samsung Q2U on his end. I've got a good mic on my end. And 97% of the listeners are not going to notice that we're on Zoom. They really won't. Especially if you use good software to edit your podcast and run it through a filter if necessary. The reason I like Zoom is for the obvious reasons. People know it. They're familiar with it. It syncs with Calendly, so I can send out a link to people and they can automatically book a time to be on my show, and we all get the links at the same time, and there's no confusion. Usually people are used to setting up the microphone in Zoom, although not everybody, but that's it. So for ease, I would just say if you're using Zoom, don't feel embarrassed. stand up and say it loud and proud. Zoom is okay.
I should point out, by the way, Zoom is in the majority. Most people do use Zoom for this stuff, but yet we do our very best in this business to ostracize them and to make them feel silly about their decision.
I use Zoom and I am proud.
Yeah. Jag.
I will say, if you are using Zoom, by the way, make sure you use the original sound for musicians setting. That's key to it.
Yep.
For me, I'm a Squadcast guy. I like Squadcast because I've been with them for a long time. I find their customer service to be very good. And then also, there's a little bit of a delay I found in Zencaster Riverside waiting for your guest to upload audio. You have to sit in the session until the audio is uploaded. I don't seem to have that issue with Squadcast. It seems to be pretty instantaneous. Squadcast has a cloud recording backup, I know, as others do. And for me, it's just been a matter of, if I record in my studio and there's a Squadcast recording and there's a Squadcast backup, I've got potentially 3 copies of everything. So it's very rare that there's audio that I don't have, that I lose.
I'm also going to go with Squadcast and remind everybody that they can get the first month free right now by going to squadcast.fm/sound off.
Wow.
Well played.
Thank you. Thank you.
Matt wrote these questions, right?
Yeah.
Jag, what do you use to edit your shows?
As far as editing software, I'm an Adobe Audition guy. I learned back in the day on what was then Cool Edit Pro before Adobe bought them out. And so just because I've learned on it, that's the software that I like. That's the software I use. The best advice I've ever heard is the best digital audio workstation software is the one you like. I hate Audacity. I know people that love it and make beautiful music or beautiful podcasts with it. But for me,
I'm a great living just off of Audacity.
Yeah, I am an Adobe Audition guy, and I also have plugins from RX for Isotope RX for some higher end stuff, and then I've used the Descript Studio sound feature and the enhancement in Adobe as well. But Adobe Audition for the win for me.
David.
I use Descript. For those that haven't tried it, I really encourage you to do so. It's not built. It was originally built, I think, as a transcription tool. The first thing it does is it transcribes your sound file, but then it does have the capabilities of fading sound out, splicing, moving things around just like you would in Audition or GarageBand or Audacity. And I just am in love with the ease to which I use it. If you're trying to find the part in the podcast where you talked about a Chihuahua and you want to take that out because you said something nasty about Chihuahuas, you search for Chihuahua. There it is. You don't need to go listening through the whole show. I do use the feature that takes out the ums and the uhs, and 99 times out of 100, there's not a problem with that. You do want to watch it. Sometimes it'll clip something you don't want to clip, but if you've got good sound, it's powerful. It's a huge time saver. And also, it's got these artificial intelligent voiceovers. So if you want to add like a little sound effect that says, "We'll be right back after this message," you can pick from like 8 different voices. And I don't use it a lot, but it comes in handy sometimes. So Descript.
So have you used the part of it, because you mentioned the AI part, where maybe the guest or the host got the dog wrong. It's not Chihuahua. You wanted to say golden retriever. You can change the word and the AI technology will use the voice to replace.
So I've messed around with that. And here's the thing with that. First of all, if you think it's scary, it's scary for someone else to have the ability to simulate your voice and make you say anything you want. What Descript does is only allows you to do your own voice. Now, granted, if you gave your credentials to someone else, they could do it, but you have to read a script that goes about 10 minutes. And then it can, in fact, simulate your voice saying Chihuahua or really anything under the sun. It's not perfect yet. If I typed out the Gettysburg Address and had me say it, a lot of the intonation would be wrong. Some of the emphasis would be on the wrong words. But in a pinch, you can use it if it's your own voice and you've gone through the steps for Descript to create a robot version of you. It's fun
Johnny,
to play.
What do you use?
I have my master's degree in Logic Pro X after getting my bachelor's from GarageBand. So started on GarageBand just because that's the free version. But if you're an Apple Mac user, it's the Apple version of Adobe Audition. So again, it's like Jag said, it's whatever's easiest for you to use. It costs $200. It's a one-time payment, which I find to be an advantage over the Adobe Suite. The Adobe Suite is a monthly subscription versus Logic. You pay it once and you have it forever. I'm also a huge plugin nerd. I love to use Crumple Pop plugins, Isotope as well. Waves has a ton of really great plugins. And then in terms of learning that stuff, I don't really think any of us went to school to learn this stuff. A lot of it is just self-taught. You find out what works. You find out how to make great sound, how to use compression. It's all by trial and error, or you hire somebody like us. However, I'm also in the camp with David as well. I'm not big on cutting out ums and uhs manually, so I will sometimes drop an audio file into Descript and only use it for removing ums and uhs, and then I'll export it back into Logic and do what I do with the rest of the episode. David, I didn't realize how powerful Descript actually was. I feel like you should do like a masterclass video course on everything that you can actually do with Descript.
It's crazy. It's like I said, just a huge time saver. Johnny, can you mentioned some of those plugins, but I don't know what they do. Give us an example.
Right. So, like for example, Crumple Pop has a plugin called Echo Remover. So that pulls the echo out. It's essentially a de-reverb tool. And then for Isotope, I really love the de-plosive tool, the de-essing tool. And then in Isotope RX, I think it's 10, they offered an audio restoration tool where it has a different type of de-reverb tool, which I have found works a lot better on voices that are not recorded with a microphone, but recorded with either AirPods or the computer speaker.
The dialogue de-reverb, right?
Yeah. And then on Waves, I really love the CLA2, which is a great compressor tool as well. And then I have one called the Elixir from a different company that I bought the plugin from, but that essentially allows me to stop clipping and peaking at -3 decibels, which I found is a really great audio to, if somebody yells or laughs in a podcast, it can really hurt the person's ears if you're not skilled in using compression. And I think that really is the biggest thing that you need to learn, is being able to stop someone's audio from going above a certain threshold. That is really what's the most key. And if you can do that and remove echo, and then you go into the next level of like removing plosives or mouth clicking, mouth declick is another great tool as well. All of that combined with a nice microphone, you're going to have a really great sounding podcast.
By the way, Jag mentioned the studio sound function in Descript, and Jag, I think you might have introduced me to that in the first place also. I'm not sure. Maybe we discovered it about the same time, but it is an absolute game changer, particularly if you're recording something where the other person doesn't have a microphone. And whether it's Zoom or any other platform, if they just sound like they're distant and fuzzy, it can rescue your pod. It's amazing. You do have to watch it because occasionally it can give the person a lisp that you probably don't want them to.
Yeah, it can pull out S's, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
And also these AI things, they're always updating. So if you use Descript, you'll see it's a new version of Descript. Do you want to upgrade? And it'll restart and upgrade your Descript. So they're always tweaking it, and some of the tweaks honestly are better than others.
The reason for that you get that kind of ething sound is when you put too much on the de-ether, that gives it, because it's muting so much of that that sharp S sound.
Yeah, it overcorrects.
You really have to fine tune that, which is, for certain people that tool works, the studio sound. I like to get a lot more surgical with it, with the actual tool, and get, really deep down into it.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, what do you use?
Well, it's Descript is going to be the name of the game right now. I started on Audacity and I used it for years and years and years, and it really was just one of those things where that's where I learned. I was comfortable. The plugins that I figured out I loved. I still sometimes will use Audacity because I like the noise reduction. The noise reduction is probably one of the better DAWs for removing some of the noise. There's a great plugin for compressing dynamics that I also really like, that is kind of like my secret sauce rescue if I ever need to do any sort of rescuing. But the ease of Descript has been very enticing. And so that's one of my projects this month, is I'm actually going through some of the tutorials of Descript to learn all of the powerful functions, because like many of us, because I was autodidact, I learned podcast production on my own and learned with Audacity. I just figured out Descript and didn't know a lot of the power that goes behind it. Studio sound, as we've already mentioned, has been a huge, huge, huge benefit to me. And just the time saving of not having to manually remove the crutch words. I just think I'd rather spend a little bit more time learning some of the functions of Descript and using it to its full potential than fiddling around with a couple of different DAWs. And so far I've been having success, especially because so much of my business now has moved to remote recording more so than it ever has been before. I do have a comment about Descript that I'm going to save for when we're talking about transcription specifically.
Yeah,
Good
we
point.
might get to the transcription part in part 2 of this at the rate that we're going through the 20
We're doing
questions
fine.
here.
Come on.
Just one more.
Lightning, kids.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have found that use Descript if you're using it with a lot of podcasts. Delete your old files because it will mysteriously take up your entire hard drive.
Yes.
Before you know it. That happened to you, Jag. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out why I was running out of memory on my computer. It was Descript, so you got to monitor it.
Oh, interesting.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I use Twisted Wave. It is for Mac only, and you can put a lot of those toys that you were talking about, Johnny, like the RX. You can include that. It is Mac only, and predominantly you can't really mix with it. So it's really just I use it just for editing and as well for my voiceover business. But I love Twisted Wave. Simple. It's a $100 purchase. Podcast host, Catherine. What podcast host do you love and why?
Do you mean you know what I realized? Do you mean a person or do you mean a hosting company?
Hosting company.
Oh, I thought he meant a person.
I had my Spotify pulled up. I was like, what podcast do I really love?
That's so funny. I interpret it. I was thinking, oh, I can't wait to talk about this person. Well, I use Libsyn for most of the shows that I work on.
Okay. Johnny?
Libsyn and Megaphone.
David?
I partner with a company called Adori, who started their company about the same time I started mine. So they're small, but very useful, terrific platform, Adori. I'll also say that I've used Buzzsprout, Simplecast, among others. Most of them are kind of all pretty good and pretty much the same, in my opinion.
Jag?
Simplecast, I have a network they set up for me so that all my clients can use dynamic ad insertion and get better statistics. I'm a big fan of Simplecast.
Don't you have an affiliate code too, Jack?
Yeah,
I
where's
do.
your
Since
link?
we're all promoting ourselves, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Get your money, kid.
Yeah, I think a lot of these podcast hosts, a lot of them do a lot of the same things now, including dynamic ad insertion. And so I'm Megaphone and Art19, but in the past I have used Libsyn. I've also used Podbean at one point. I guess the one thing I would do not use SoundCloud is still my mantra.
Yes.
Do not use SoundCloud. Okay.
They never really caught up, did they?
So interesting question here. The most underrated marketing hack for promoting a podcast that you have. What is the most underrated marketing hack for promoting a podcast? Jag.
Something that I think a lot of people don't know is you can share a Spotify link to Instagram. If you hit the share button on Spotify, you can post the direct link to your Instagram. And one of the problems with posting to social media is how do you move somebody over from the social media app they're on to the podcast app you want them to listen on? One click, share Spotify to Instagram.
David.
Mine would be shout outs and then tagging people in social media. So to give an example, if you're doing a podcast about cars, and I know nothing about cars, but it's just an example, on your Facebook page, put a question that says, hey, who remembers what their first car was? And you'll probably get a dozen people saying what their first car is. Now you do your podcast episode about everyone's first car, and the people that chimed in, they may not even listen to your podcast, but they responded to you on social media. So you say, hey, I just want to shout out, Catherine drove a Buick and Johnny drove a Eldorado, and sorry, I'm making that up. And then when you post the podcast, say, check out this podcast we did about first cars. And then you tag all the people that commented. And now you've got, a bunch of people that are potentially ambassadors to your podcast. Not only are they going to listen, but maybe they'll hear it.
Catherine, what's yours?
Direct mailing, burning your podcast onto CDs and sending them out in a special mailer to everybody.
Wow.
No.
For real?
No.
You had me.
Yeah, CDs. What is that?
I'm gonna say doing cold emails to people, places, things that you talk about on the show. That's something with some of my clients that we've been starting to do is just doing a reach out. If we talk to people, talk about people on the podcast, is sending them a little promotional emails, telling them where the segment starts, talking about them. And I don't know what the response, it is something I'm doing. I can't attest to the success or failure yet, but I think it's something that is worthwhile doing. It's just that little extra step for when you're talking about somebody on the podcast.
Johnny.
Go on other podcasts. Go be a guest on other shows. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'd love to go do that, but who's similar to my audience? What is a tool that I could use to find shows that are in the same lane as mine? Well, there's a great tool called Rephonic. That's REPHONIC.com. They have a graph where you just type in your podcast name and it will show you, based on listener data pulled from Apple Podcasts, what other shows that your listeners listen to. You can find like 100 shows, and it's like a little spider web graph. Your show's in the middle, and all the shows that are really similar to yours are connected. Cold email them. I'd love to be a guest on your podcast. I think we have a similar audience. You can offer a cross promotion kind of deal to get on their show. They come on your show, and you open yourself up to an entirely new audience, and you've already whittled down the demographic to people who listen to podcasts.
Do you actually,
Johnny?
Do you actually mention in that email that you use this Rephonic tool? And I guess you don't need to. You don't want to sound like you're pitch person for Rephonic, I guess. Yeah.
No, you want to pretend that you're listening to their show.
Yeah.
Your best friends ever.
I think
of all time,
awesome.
right? Yeah. Mine's a Facebook birthday. So when somebody that you've had on your show has a birthday, go on their Facebook page, wish them happy birthday, and thanks a lot for coming on my podcast, and leave a link, because who's going to listen to the show but all their friends?
Wow. That's a great one.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're going to have 500 people visiting their Facebook page. Most of them only that day for the rest of the year, but that's the day they're going to visit them. Love it.
David, what's the best day to release an episode?
I have nothing more than conventional wisdom here that says Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I'd say think out of the box and think about your audience. There's a music podcast I do, and we discovered that we actually did very well releasing on Friday or Saturday. And our thinking was that our podcast is much more of a dessert than a meat and potatoes meal, and that people probably just save it for Friday, or, when they're walking the dog on a Saturday. When dogs are pooping, that's when we want people listening to our show. So.
Amen.
Well, Jag, you walked the dog this morning.
I did.
What's the best day?
I'd say Tuesday, because to David's point, Monday and Friday are too close to the weekend and people are out of routine. So I'd say Tuesday. But to David's point, do a little trial and error sometimes. You can sometimes get a better feel for where your audience is. But once you figure that out, be consistent. So I say
Catherine?
Okay, this is blowing my mind, because almost every weekly podcast I listen to comes out on Mondays or Thursdays. But then whenever we have these kind of conversations, I hear Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Seems so crazy. I'm going to be day agnostic. I'm just going to say early morning. You have to do it overnight at midnight plus a minute or whatever, because we all know that morning is the most popular time people are listening to their podcasts.
Johnny?
Let me counter that really quick, Catherine, because of this conversation, that specific topic just came up of releasing it at midnight. And that's when I release most of the shows that I work on. However, the counter argument to that is if someone decides to release their episode at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., everyone's still waking up at 6:30 in the morning. Right. Their show is now at the top of their feed versus I now have to scroll down to yours that was released at midnight if I'm subscribed to a bunch of different podcasts. So something to think about. As for days of release, I would say release it on the day that you can stick to consistently.
I'm a fan of 6 a.m. as well. I'll co-sign on that.
I'm a fan of 1 a.m. I want it there overnight. I want them waking up to it. I don't think that there's a bunch of episodes that really sort of pop up the way that they used to. I want it to get everywhere. And also, my 1 a.m. is somebody else's 7 a.m. in Spain. So
none of us are international podcasters like you, Matt.
No, but I'm number one in Nigeria. Watch out. Watch out.
You're huge in Nigeria.
Yeah. And by the way, most of my clients request Tuesday. Just because I think it's the easier marketing day, and you can still get an ask out of people, hey, listen to this podcast, as opposed to if you do it on Thursday, there's less time in the week for people to make a plan to listen to the show. But the correct answer, by the way, is to release it today.
Today's Tuesday.
Whatever today is.
Yeah. Catherine, what was the very first podcast you produced for someone else?
Well, the very first podcast I produced for somebody else was the Pawcast, which I did for Friends of the Annals Baton Rouge. But then the first podcast that I was paid to do is Solo Travel Talk for Astrid Clements, who is a travel writer.
Jag?
what is that called? It's called Living with Cystic Fibrosis. Laura Bonnell, my very first client, she has 2 daughters with cystic fibrosis. She has a foundation, and she puts together a tremendous podcast talking to people in the cystic fibrosis community. I have learned a lot about this horrible disease through this podcast. She's been a great client for 4 or 5 years now.
Johnny.
December of 2018, The Fort with Chris Powers. Still a client of mine today. We just released episode 275 today.
Woo, 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 woo.
Wow.
He has crossed
Tuesday.
over 1 million downloads, and he's kicking ass.
David.
The Canna Mom Show featuring Joyce Gerber. So she interviews women who have done well in the cannabis industry. It's anything but a stoner podcast. It's very much about the business of cannabis, but have learned a lot about cannabis over the years, and God bless her, weekly, almost without exception. Sometimes she takes a few weeks in the summers off, but still doing it, still going strong.
Excellent.
Mine was Your Gut Reaction with Marla Barr, which was released right around July of 2018. Hasn't pod faded, but we haven't produced an episode now in about 8 months. So hopefully that one will restart again soon. But by the way, that question was inspired by Steve Pratt, who told me at a conference that you never forget your first when it comes to making a podcast.
Do you ever go back and listen to the old ones you produced and say, "Oh my God, it's garbage"? Because I
sucked.
Oh,
I say to myself, why did I let that person talk on that microphone? Why did I post this? What was I thinking?
Every podcast host who's done 10 episodes hates the way their first one sounded, and us editors and producers were all the same way.
That's right. So just dive right in. Don't stop trying to make your first episode perfect, people, because no matter what you do, episodes 2, 3, 4, episodes 21, 31, 100, they're all going to be better than your first one.
Johnny, what's the one thing you wish podcasters would stop doing?
Saying
all right, David.
I thought. Sorry, I got confused.
This is a real question.
I know. I wish they would stop stammering and avoiding the question like this podcaster is doing. I don't like the throat clearing stuff going on at the beginning of a show unless you've really earned it. In other words, if I click on a podcast and I want to know the 3 ways to help make my car go faster or whatever. I don't know why I keep talking about cars, but the 3 ways to make my peanut butter sandwich taste better. I want to hear those 3 things. I don't want to hear the host talking about how they got up this morning and shoveled the snow. And did you hear about how the Clippers did last night? Come on, get to the point.
Catherine.
this is a little bit from the host side of things. I'm really tired of podcast hosts debating all of the things about the video podcast and the audio podcast. I'm really very, very tired of that conversation completely. And you know what? I'm getting a little sick of podcasts that are just chock-a-block with ads. That is starting to get to me as well.
Jag.
Using a Blue Yeti microphone.
I knew he was going to say that.
You all knew I was going to say that. My
Really?
lifelong crusade against the
Blue Yeti rep that watches this stream.
I know. We're never going to get a sponsor for.
Hey, Matt, I don't know if we'll get to this later, and I know we still need your answer, but if we could spend maybe 90 seconds on what Catherine said about ads, because I struggle with this. I've got a podcast that has as many as 8 ads, and it's almost simply too many. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you think it's worth talking about how you space those out.
Well, I actually, Jag and I would have just flunked match game because I thought he was going to say for podcasters to stop asking for ratings and reviews.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, that's number 2 on my list.
So yeah, but I'm taking that answer and that's my answer. But to that, I don't mind talking, David. Let's talk a little bit about ads for a second. Catherine's point. So what's the problem with ads and how do we fix it?
I worry about the pre-roll ads because, especially for a podcast that's still in its first year, I want to get to the meat. I know it's become part of the industry to have a couple ads pre-roll, but if you're Rogan, you can get away with that. So I tend to pick two mid-roll spots and no more than 60 seconds each. That's what I aspire to, but I'm not necessarily right. That's just my taste.
I'll jump in. I'll say that Pre-rolls are not great in my opinion, because your first minute of your podcast is your first impression, and especially of your most recent episode in most cases. Somebody finds your podcast, they check it out, the first thing they hear is ads. That's going to turn them off. So I hear what you're saying, David.
I'm going to play. Hold on. I want to play devil's advocate really quick. One, the host gets money for having ads. You're going to make the most amount of money by selling pre-roll ads. If the listener doesn't like the ads but loves your podcast, they'll skip through them.
Fair, but I just worry about building audience. And
yeah, that's existing listeners versus new listeners is what we're debating here, I think.
Time codes. Put in time codes. First question starts here. Touch that. Skip everything.
Well, does anybody worry about how we're all encouraging our clients to be on YouTube? If you're on YouTube, when the typical user clicks on the podcast, they're going to get an ad, a YouTube ad before the podcast even starts. So you get
not
YouTube.
They hit 1,000 subs.
No, pretty much any YouTube video has unless you're a premium user, we're all watching a 15-second ad, right?
Okay. I don't know. I use YouTube Premium.
You know.
Well, let me pop in here. So there's like a little bit of a combination of what you guys are talking about. So I listen to some podcasts where the host of the show will do some host read ads that are built into the show. Then there will be dynamic ad insertion that is giving another voice, or just like a standard commercial advertisement popped in either before, mid-roll, or even post-roll, in the outro area. And I, for years as a podcast lover, I have been diligent about listening to the ads because I saw it as part of my support of the show that I was liked. I have bought things using promo codes that I might not otherwise buy because I'm supporting the shows that I like. So I'm one of those people. I want to support the podcasting. But now it seems like, because we're now into the territory of CPM, so this is we're podcasts are being subjected to more of the standard advertising rate, that now podcasters are doing more and more advertising for smaller amounts of money. So it just is becoming more. And I guess my thought was, forgive me for being nostalgic, but some of the magic of podcasting, of just having that show that is about the content, or about the whatever the subject is of the podcast, starts getting diluted with so many ads getting stuck in there. And it applies to YouTube as well as just in the straight up audio.
Final counterpoint from my end. Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast and Tim Ferriss are each doing over 1 million downloads per episode, and the first 9 minutes of both of their shows are ads.
Skip.
Yeah,
Skip.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Who listens to that many ads? I mean,
nobody. They skip through them.
Yeah. Well, then why are we doing them?
Yeah. Catherine, you get to start, even though you just finished. You get to continue on here. What was the podcast that inspired you to get into podcasting?
I think I think Adam Carolla, because Adam Carolla was on morning radio in Los Angeles, and like so many radio jobs, he did the podcast. He made the jump to podcasting, and it was the first one that I sort of watched in real time become successful. I also was a fan of public radio that were also releasing their show as a podcast, and it was just sort of like, what is this podcasting thing? It took me a while to get it, but I think Adam Carolla was the first one that I watched that was exclusively doing podcasting.
Jag?
Probably The Daily from the New York Times. That was the first one I listened to religiously. They do such a great job every morning on deep dive on one particular topic.
David?
Mine, Catherine stole my thunder. Adam Carolla was the one that got me into it, because I realized in listening to the Adam Carolla show, even if he didn't have a guest that was entertaining, he was so talented in just the art of conversation and observing everyday things with his two sidekicks. That interplay, the art of that conversation became the reason for tuning in. There's one other I'll mention, and it was a short-run podcast. It was by comedian Jeff Garland, who most people know from Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's Larry's agent, but he did a series of conversations recorded live at Largo in LA, and he made it into this podcast series called By the Way. And what was interesting was he would be talking to his guest. The guest would share a story. Jeff Garland would say, that reminds me of that. And he would tell a story. And one time the guest was like, I thought I was being interviewed. And Jeff Garland says, no, it's a conversation. It's a conversation. And that really to me is at the heart of podcasting is what I tell all my hosts is don't be afraid to talk. The listeners want to hear from you too. It's your show. So there you go.
Johnny.
Congratulations with Chris D'Elia, stand-up comedian who was since recently been canceled. But his was just kind of a solo ranting podcast, and he was just so good at just talking for an hour. And I just loved the medium of just hearing someone be so entertaining. And it's not music, it's not a YouTube video. It was just something different, and it just, I love it.
Has he not been uncanceled yet?
He's come back and he's got, he's back in touring and stuff. But, I feel like I outgrew his comedy. It seems like it's just for a different age demographic. So, but that was who I first started.
Says the youngest guy in the group.
Right.
Well, yeah, there's almost a double meaning to what you just said too.
Yeah.
Mine was
never mind.
a podcast called YOY, which is actually a dating podcast that was done by Panoply. But I just love the fact that they were recording people who were on dates, and then it sounded a little bit public radio, but it didn't. It sounded very warm, and I thought, oh, that's a completely different sound than radio. And at that moment, I said, I want to create audio that sounds like that. Yeah. And that's kind of how I got here.
What if you had to pinpoint one difference between, and Jag, you're good to answer this as well, between radio and podcasting, Matt? I have my answer, but I want to hear from you, former radio guys.
Podcasting, you're speaking to somebody. Radio, you're speaking at somebody.
I would say for me, radio is very cutthroat, and it's us versus them. If you're not, it's a limited pie, and for podcasting, it's more rising tide lifts all boats.
Wow.
Yeah, you're both wrong, even though you're former radio guys. No, I don't know. I always thought it was that podcasts can breathe. You can let it breathe. It's what I tell a guest when I sit down. We're going to go for 30 minutes, but if we're having fun, we'll go longer. You can't do that on radio, right? It's like look at the clock, look at the meter, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a double meaning too. You can let that episode now breathe forever versus for radio, I need to be listening to you in my car at 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday and Thursday.
You want those Taylor Swift tickets?
Yeah.
Yes, that's so true, Johnny. But what app are you going to be listening to? Favorite app to listen to podcasts, and explain your answer.
I use Spotify because it allows me to have my music and my podcasts right there. There's also they're rolling it out for more and more people, but for some shows there is a video component for podcasts. Not totally sure how that all works. Spotify also allows you to ask questions to the listener. If you scroll to the bottom of the show notes, you can have a Q&A. What did you think about this episode? Would you recommend this episode to a friend? You can totally customize all that as well. And then there's one more thing that I'm trying to figure out. I've seen it with, again, Dr. Huberman's podcast is chapter markers, not just the time codes. The time codes are listed out, but if you scroll even further, there are actual chapter blocks listed out there. So I'm trying to figure out how to get those for my clients.
Catherine.
Podcast Republic, because I have an Android phone. That's first. Now coming in strong, I'm listening to more and more podcasts on YouTube because I'm on YouTube for other reasons. And Spotify, I do like the user experience. So those are my top three.
Jag.
I started on Apple Podcasts. I went over to Spotify after I got frustrated with the UX or UI on Apple. I'm told Apple has improved it, but I'm good on Spotify. Even though I don't pay for Spotify, I feel no need to go back.
David.
After this podcast, maybe I'll switch. I don't know. I listen on Apple Podcasts. I tried to go to Spotify. It just was like I was used to wearing this old shoe, so I went back to the old shoe.
It takes a couple tries.
It's true, yeah. It's you got to hit that Coke machine a few times before you tip it over. So I'm eager to hear more about what you can do on Spotify. It's a wonderful product. So Apple Podcasts, but only out of familiarity. There are a lot of problems with it.
In the car, it's Apple. On the airplane, it's Apple. In the home, though, it is Spotify, so I can sync it up with my smart speaker device. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
You're like the one of 10 global people that uses a smart speaker to listen to podcasts, according to Triton Digital.
Well, I'm still using Spotify. I'm just listening to it through the smart speaker, so I'm not sure Triton is picking up what I'm throwing down. So again, sometimes the data can be a little bit funky, right?
Always.
That's true.
Jag, what's the hardest part about making a podcast?
Planning out the content, making sure that you know how you're going to get from A to B to C. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client say, well, let's just get on the riff for a while, and the final product shows.
Catherine?
The time it takes to make a high quality episode.
Johnny?
Dealing with a guest when you're recording remotely. They don't have a microphone. They have a shite internet connection, and their dog is barking in the background, and their newborn's on their lap.
David?
Oh, sorry.
Is
I'd
that
say
your newborn?
No, that was my newborn puppy. Scheduling guests. There's no way around it. It's a headache to try to stay on your cadence of posting and get guests lined up when you need to. So you got to be vigilant.
Jag, I'm going to ask this. What was the question again? It was
The hardest part.
Oh, the answer is editing. It just takes so long, right? And especially if you're like David, who you get clients who just riff and go forever. Now you got 2 hours to edit, and that's going to be 4.5 hours. Mm-hmm. Jag, I think I know your answer with this one, but I want everyone to sort of name the podcast you've worked on that exceeded your expectations in terms of performance. And you mentioned the cystic fibrosis podcast. Was it that one or another one?
It wasn't. Can I cheat and give you two?
Yeah, go.
So as I've mentioned in previous episodes, my WJPZ 50 podcast from my college radio station is now over 6,000 downloads for a real niche audience of folks that that would be tied to the radio station. But I'm going to give you another one, and that is the Marrow Masters podcast that I work on with the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. This is a podcast providing resources to folks who have been through a bone marrow transplant. And we have, I'm looking at it right now on my screen, we have, I think 78 episodes. And in 78 episodes, we have almost 20,000 downloads, because this is super serving a community, and they are spreading it within the community, this resource with information for people who have had a bone marrow transplant. So the Marrow Masters podcast for me.
Catherine?
I have to say, living love it by far. First of all, I've been having this phenomenal relationship working with the host of the show, Jessica, who works at this independent school based in Atlanta, Georgia. And she gets the most incredible feedback week after week after week regarding this show. She's had alumni who have not been in contact with the school say this is the first thing that made them feel connected to the school in a decade. We've heard from parents. We've heard from prospective families. We've heard from people who want to work at the school. I actually asked her, I said, are you making these up, these letters and these cards that you're getting? Because I'm just blown away by how much impact this show is having. And in fact, they were profiled in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution paper based on the show. It's just been just tremendous. And I am so grateful to be a part of that show.
Johnny?
This show is called Think Like an Owner, hosted by a fantastic guy named Alex Bridgman. And similar to Jack, very niche audience, people who are looking to buy a small or medium-sized business. Small niche audience, however, very wealthy audience. And he was able to leverage partnerships with advertisers to go full-time on the podcast, fully paid for his entire life at like 23 years old. And
wow.
It was just incredible what he's been able to do.
David?
I produced a podcast called Monsterland, which was you talk about exceeded expectations. I didn't know what to expect. These two dudes approached me. They are fans and enthusiasts of the paranormal, Bigfoot, UFOs, the whole deal. Turns out they're both funny, charming. They're not nuts, as I might have suspected. And you talk about a niche audience. It's just that thing. If you're into the paranormal, you are going to crave that information. And to this day, I think it's a podcast that garnered the most downloads of any I've produced. So never underestimate the passion of a niche audience of any weird thing you can dream up. That's what podcasting is a lot of times.
Yeah, and I'm going to say the exact same thing for two of the honorable mentions that I have, which is Humans on Rights, which is a podcast out of Winnipeg, championing human rights. And the other one is You Do Woo, which is a Texas-based podcast about human design. But the one that I've really opened my eyes, again, it's Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Ivis, and it's just simply about going outdoors. And the number of people who came to support the show and support it through advertising, we sold out in 6 months, and now we don't have any place to put the ads.
Good problem to have.
Well, again, we also banged on having too many ads earlier on, but eventually, every show does.
Put them all at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you have a limit, so I'm content.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure she'll say, "Why are we reading 10 minutes of ads before I do my show?"
Shut up. Take this money.
Catherine, transcription. What do you use? What's the best?
I have been using Descript, and I'll say this, is that because of the nature of a lot of my clients, they are in industries, and this is speaking about U.S. law, because of accessibility issues, I recommend my clients have a transcript. People like them, or let's say a limited number of people like them. Some people rely on them, and so that's why we say yes to having a transcript. Because I'm using Descript anyway with my editing, that's where I like to get the transcription. Here's my beef. I just discovered, Descript, that if you put in 2 tracks, which is I record in multi-track as much as I can, a 29-minute speaker A audio with a 29-minute speaker B into Descript, they count that as 58 minutes of transcription, eating away at my monthly allowance, which I think that's bogus, because the final product is a 29-minute audio. So I might have a sternly worded tweet to Descript later to find out more about this.
Can you combine the tracks, download it, and then re-upload it, and then it's only one track, or no?
But so that's just more work for me. That seems.
Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Yeah.
The
Anybody
Descript
here
rep just followed the Blue Yeti rep out of the chat room.
There goes my promo
We're
code.
just
Promo code
torching
Catherine.
bridges
Yeah.
for sponsors.
Yeah.
Johnny, what about you?
I'm very old school. I use people. I have a gal out in Greece who does all my transcripts, and a young lad in Pakistan who do transcriptions for me. And the reason I use people is I encourage them to use AI software. So in terms of actual products, one of them is called Otter.ai, Otter, like the cute little water dog. The reason I use people to do it is that they're proofreading it for me for grammar, readability, and then I also have them bold out all of the questions that the host asks in order to clip those for blog posts, screenshot them to tweet, anything like that. But essentially, it's so I don't have to read through it. I trust them enough to be able to do it.
You know what's so sad is I actually thought when you said people, I go, people, what is that? Is that ppl.com?
.app, right?
Magazine?
It's a living organism hybrid AI.
David?
So I do use Descript, but if you want an accurate transcript that you're going to put on your website, I don't think you can really use Descript unless you're ready to spend a few hours editing it. So correct. I use, for those purposes, I use Trent.com, which of all I've looked at, that seems to be the most accurate, markedly more accurate than Descript. And we'll even do things like put in parentheses, laughter, if the person laughs, which I think is cool.
That Trent, like the name?
Trent, Trint. And, and I got to pay extra for that, but I wish Descript was super accurate because I love it for everything else. But
I took a look at Trent, and I thought that's pretty high end.
Yeah, it is.
When I saw the price,
$60 a month.
How much
for unlimited transcriptions, or $48 a month if you want to do 7 files per month. 32 different languages, identify speakers automatically, custom vocabulary that you can add, capture from Zoom, edit simultaneously into teams up to 3 users, share with anyone to view and comment.
It's pricey, but it's the one that I have to spend, in a 30-minute podcast, I have to spend no more than 10 minutes scanning the thing to make sure there are no mistakes. There might be a few, but
translates to 54 languages.
That's
right.
interesting.
And so if you want to translate it to Farsi just for fun, go for it.
That's a legitimately great recommendation. Thank you, David.
Well, I'm having that success with Podin.io because I can listen back and it's 93% accurate and I can catch it all.
I'm a Descript guy, although I have started playing around with a website called Capsho, CAPSHO, where they use AI to generate not only a transcript, but show notes and social media blog posts for your episode. It's a little on the pricey side. I'm going to dig into it a little bit more, but I'll report back next month.
You can use ChatGPT to correct errors in transcription, but I heard that it just seemed it might be just making an extra work.
It stops at a certain length.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like I put in a whole transcript into ChatGPT and it said this is too long of an entry.
Let's go around with newsletters, Jag.
Aweber, it's an email service that will actually pull straight from your RSS feed, and you can set up an automation to go out when you hit publish on your podcast. AWEBER.
Catherine?
I don't really. For one client, I do some stuff on MailChimp, which I would prefer not to do. So I have no recommendation. I'm open to recommendations.
Johnny.
www.substack.com/Johnny Podcasts for a weekly newsletter that you will get in your inbox. It's the only email you will get. This is my promo for the part of the podcast. I love Substack. I think it's great. I just recently switched over there after Twitter's newsletter thing got shut down. Loved it.
Little footnote, do not put your podcast on Substack. There is no 301 redirect.
Oh, really?
Really? David.
I'm with Catherine. I don't really do too many newsletters. On the occasions I have, I've used GoDaddy. It's fine, but not great. So I'm kind of useless at it.
I'm going to remain a little bit agnostic with this too. I use MailChimp, but Substack, if I started today, I would probably start with Substack. You only get to use one social media platform to promote all your shows forever. What will you use, Catherine?
I have to just say Twitter. It's too podcasty.
Johnny.
You already know my answer. The tweet man.
Jag.
Twitter is the most valuable. I think has the most valuable audience. You have to find the right audience, but I think that the most high value people that are using social media are on Twitter. Get rid of all the politics. Get rid of all the social commentary stuff. When you find the right audience, they're on Twitter.
For me, it's funny. My gut was Twitter, but I'm going to actually change and say LinkedIn, because I think you can make some real meaningful connections on LinkedIn with hashtags in your network.
David.
I would also say LinkedIn, and especially if you're looking to appeal to a corporate audience. I've said this before, but when bank robber Willie Sutton asked why he robbed banks, he said, because that's where the money is. And if you had to pick one social media channel where corporations live, it's LinkedIn.
So I was going to say Instagram, but you guys have convinced me it's Twitter and LinkedIn. That is all. Before we get to the next question, I want Johnny to explain to everybody what an interface is in the technical terms.
An interface?
Interface? Like a audio interface?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So an audio interface is when you're looking at microphones. Am I correct, Matt? Is that what you want me to talk about?
Yes.
Oh, okay, you were moving your hand like, what are you doing? So when you're looking at your microphone, you see the big plug-in, that's an XLR. Most microphones have the XLR option. Other microphones have a XLR and USB option. If you have the USB option, you can plug directly into your computer. If you only have the XLR option, don't worry, you are not out of luck. You can use what is called a USB audio interface like this. This is the Wave XLR. My XLR only microphone is running right into this fun little box that has a USB out that goes directly into my computer and allows me to use a really nice microphone on the internet to record remote podcasts.
And
you really need to.
I'm glad you explained that, by the way, because people don't, when we talk about this, people are like, well, why do I need this? Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, certainly if you have a co-host and you're in the same room together, don't try to do this thing where you plug in two USB microphones into the same laptop. It can be done, I think, but not well. So what do you got there, Johnny?
Recorder. This is a physical recorder. If you're in person together, you can use your XLR microphones to plug into this. This is the Zoom PodTrack P4.
Yeah, I was going to say Zoom H4.
Yep.
So Catherine, that's your answer?
Yes.
Okay. I'm all right with the Zoom H5. All right. Jag.
This is for a simple one-on-one. This is if we can hold this in my webcam the right way. This is the Focusrite. One mic in, USB out to the computer. If you're recording multiple people, somebody over a phone, or USB, or anything like that, I would say instead, I would say the Rodecaster, which is pricey but worth it.
And David.
Yeah, I'm a Rodecaster guy. Again, if you can afford it, it really is the way to go. If you're looking for if there's one place you're going to stretch to take your podcast to the next level, it's the Rodecaster. Although it's high end, it's made for dummies. It really is. It's like Fisher Price.
Well, we all know that David's got all the high end stuff going here today. So it's good.
You want more sound effects? I got sound effects. You want?
Thanks.
You want the theme to Benny Hill? Thank you.
Do you have the Seinfeld bass line?
Um,
Oh my gosh.
that was
And
not
stop
planned.
it right there. Stop it right there so we don't get flagged. Perfect.
Yeah. What about Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I'll go on.
Wow.
Would it be easier to
Wow.
ask the things that you don't
Don't
have
have,
on the soundboard?
It's a little
Wow.
demo of the Roadcaster.
And this is
Wow.
why podcasting is better than radio, because if we're in radio, we're about to hit 60 minutes. We would have had to cut it off. We can keep going. Next question.
Be time for WBZ News.
Yeah.
Nice
Hey,
reference.
good call, yeah.
What's the most overlooked way to monetize your podcast, Jag?
Come back to me. I had to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Catherine, the most overlooked way to monetize your podcast.
I'm going to say get them on your list because people still buy from the list. And so if there's a way that you can get people to opt into your email list, that is going to be long-term the best way to turn something into money.
Johnny,
There is a company out there for your podcast that aligns exactly with your niche, that is looking to market to your audience. You don't need to find 10 sponsors. You need to find one company to get your foot in the door that can become the title sponsor of your show. Build a relationship with them over time. Hey, I want you to be the exclusive sponsor of my show. I'll put you on my cover art. I'll call you out at the beginning of every episode. That's all you need.
David,
Inviting potential clients on your podcast. This is presuming you have a day job. You're inviting someone that can be a client of yours in your avocation. They get dazzled by the job you do, letting them tell their story on your show. And it, in a way, it doesn't matter if anybody even listens to that episode. The client loved it, and they give you more business or whatever. There you go.
mine is to actually show up. So it's to show up to a convention or a conference for your podcast. So if it's about radio, show up at a radio convention. If it's about widgets, go to the widgets convention, get in the middle of the whole thing and tell people about their podcast. You'll probably leave with possibly some partnership or ad deals. Jag, is there anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, I believe the widget conference is in Anaheim this year. That said, I would say lead generation. I work with a bunch of financial advisors, and you're putting information out there that's useful for somebody planning their retirement. For a financial advisor, if they get one high net worth client, they listen to the podcast and want to work with them, podcast is paid for itself for a year at that point.
Yep.
Headphones. What are your favorite headphones, David?
Audio Technica. I don't know. Jag told me it's Audio Technica something. I defer to Jag.
Jag.
Yeah, Audio Technica is kind of the way to go. Look, we've had 3 votes for it already.
I'm wearing Parrot. I like them.
I will say as an addendum though, in a pinch, your microphone is way more important than your headphones. Those cheap little white headphones that come with an iPhone, as long as they have that standard 1/8-inch jack and not the square rectangular one, you can plug those in and get it done quick and dirty if need be.
Johnny, what are you using and what do you recommend?
These are so for production, like post-production stuff, I'm using the Audio Technica M50X. Those are the highest end of the Audio Technica headphones. What I'm using right now are called the Shure 515. So these are just in-ear monitors. I wear those over-the-ear headphones all day long, and then these I feel like just look better. I can show my hair off. I can wear a hat.
We're all jealous. Well, 3 out of the 4 of us are jealous when you say hair.
I'm a big believer in the fact that most of the people watching and listening probably have AirPods. I think you're fine using your AirPods when you're recording a podcast as the listening device to hear the other person.
you.
It is important to be able to hear yourself, but as long as you're not drifting away from the microphone too much, that's what normally you're using the headphones for, is to make sure you're still engaging with the front of the microphone. I agree with Jag. I think spend the money on the microphone and the recorder. Headphones are tertiary.
Tertiary.
I got a pair of Bear
I went to
Dynamics.
college too. Didn't even get that.
These are Bear Dynamics. They're a little bit more gentle in the ears with the low end. I rather enjoy them. They retail in Canada for $279, $239 in the United States.
Wow.
And I got them over the more popular Sony ones, which began to hurt my ears at one point. But I'm glad that you brought up, Johnny, the over-the-ear stuff, because I think a lot of people don't want to appear on YouTube with big, bulky headphones, even though we are all on YouTube right now with big, bulky headphones.
The cans, as they call them in the business.
Cans. We've reached the end. This is question number 20, and you're only going to be asked to part with one podcast prediction. Who would like to serve up a podcast prediction?
AI will not kill the podcast editor. At the end of the day, the tools can be as simple as possible. If you find the right client and that they're going to hire you, they do not want to edit their own podcast. Simple as that. It could be the same as just uploading it. The AI says, I promise you this will be perfectly edited and sound engineered to the best of your capabilities. They're going to want a human looking at it at the end. So
I like that. Hear, hear. Jag, you got one?
I do. YouTube will incorporate RSS feeds by the end of 2023, and you will be able to count your podcast listens in YouTube and from your podcast host together in one place.
David?
I think the restrictions on using things like copyrighted music will continue to soften over the years, and I've noticed Spotify is sending out an email where they shrewdly will flag copyrighted material, but then allow you to click on a box that explains whether you're using it fairly or not. One of the great myths of copyright law is that you're not allowed to use any second shred or anything of copyright. It's not exactly true. There's a thing called fair use. So it's not a bold prediction, but that's mine.
Catherine, do you have one?
Yes. And of course, because it's me, it's sort of philosophical in nature. I think that we're going to see, for the next year, let's say, there's going to be more decentralization in podcasting. People who did a lot of acquisitions and what have you, things are being shut down. People are getting laid off. I think that there's going to be a little bit of moving back to the podcasting with things getting decentralized, which will then quickly be followed, let's say a couple of years down the line, by some re-centralization, people trying to get value and do that sort of consolidating to try and make podcasting gets the most that they can monetarily out of podcasting. I think that we see these forces coming in. There's a lot of people who have a lot of hopes and dreams wrapped up in podcasting, and we never quite make it. And it's interesting to me because podcasting started as a decentralized medium. That was part of the appeal, and people wanted to consolidate it because they want to make money. And it's just going to be this little bit of a back and forth on that for the next couple of years.
So my podcast prediction is no good anymore. Jag ruined it because his prediction was more specific than what mine was going to be. And I was just going to say YouTube is going to be looking for a new podcast strategy within a year. But Jag took it a step further and just mentioned instead, and correctly so, I believe, is that it will include RSS feeds at some point. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more prediction. The Podcast Superfriends are going to be just the go-to resource for everybody who wants to know about podcasting.
When I think of the army of people screaming fair use, let me play music and sound effects on my podcast, I imagine David on the lead horse with his face painted blue and white like Braveheart.
Follow me up the mountain, boys.
Pulling his with a roadcaster under his arm.
You'll never take my music.
Right. Right.
All right, we've hit the end. This is where we say goodbye and everybody reminds everybody who they are. We will start with Catherine and we will go clockwise around and thank everybody and tell everybody where you can be found.
Okay, and after hours, this will be a teaser for our audience. Is I have an idea for an upcoming episode. But my name is Catherine O'Brien. It's been my pleasure being with you. I want Twitter followers too, so follow me. Hello, Catherine O on Twitter, and my company is Branch Out Programs. BranchOutPrograms.com.
I'm Johnny. You can find me on Substack when you search Johnny Podcast. Go subscribe.
Pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network.
And another one. John Gay, Jag in Detroit Podcast, jagindetroit.com, or on Twitter at Jag in Detroit.
Matt Kundle, the Sound Off Media Company, and also the Sound Off Podcast Network out of Winnipeg, Canada. That's it. Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Matt.
Thank you.